It was a Thursday evening when he dropped the bombshell. The sun was setting outside, painting the room in a soft golden hue, but inside I felt the coldness seep in. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands fidgeting with the coffee mug, eyes avoiding mine. I knew something was off, but I couldn't have prepared for what he said next. "Olivia, we need to talk." His voice was shaky, but not from fear, from something else. Something I hadn't seen in him for years. I felt a lump form in my throat as my heart started pounding. I tried to steady my breath, but it wasn't working. "We've outgrown each other," he said, the words slow, deliberate. Outgrown each other. My mind couldn't wrap around it. We'd been together for nearly 25 years. Married for 18. We had built everything together, from the house we lived in to the life we had created with our kids. And now, in one sentence, everything was coming undone. The silence hung in the air. I could feel the weight of it. The years of memories, the arguments we'd weathered, the laughter and love. It was all collapsing. He didn't even seem to notice how much it hurt me. Maybe he did, but he couldn't bring himself to care. He was looking at me but not really looking at me. His eyes were distant, like he was somewhere else. With someone else. "I need something different, Olivia. Someone who fits my life better," he continued, as though this was the most casual conversation. Someone who fits. What did that even mean? I gave up my career, my own ambitions, to support his, to support us. I had been the one who made the sacrifices. The late nights, the long hours, the juggling of everything while he focused on his job, his future, his world. But now I was just too much. Too old, too tired. And he needed someone who could fit into the new version of his life. I don't even remember the exact moment when he handed me the papers. Maybe it was the shock that kept me frozen, but I didn't see it coming. The divorce papers. Staring at me like a foreign document, something that didn't belong in our life. He didn't even give me a chance to ask why. He didn't let me fight for us. He simply pushed the papers toward me and told me it was over. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part came when I found out where he went after. Not to a hotel, not to a friend's place. Well, he moved in with her. Clara. The woman he'd introduced to me 2 years ago as just a work colleague. Clara, who was barely a whisper in our life before, but now was at the center of it. The same age as our youngest daughter. They didn't think I'd do anything. They didn't think I'd fight. But they made one huge mistake. The house wasn't just his. It was mine too. It wasn't long before I started to see how far Greg was willing to go to erase me. The house, the one I helped build, the one that held all of our memories, started to feel like someone else's place. And I was just a guest in my own life. One morning a letter arrived. It wasn't from Greg, surprisingly. No, this time it was from her. Clara. She had the audacity to send me a letter. On pink stationery. No less, like she was sending me an invitation to a party I wasn't invited to. The letter was short, to the point, and dripping with fake politeness. "Dear Olivia," it began. "Please arrange a time to collect the remainder of your belongings. Greg and I are settling in, and we'd like to start this new chapter without interruptions. Mornings work best." Her words stung. Interruptions. That's how she saw me. A nuisance in her shiny new life with my ex-husband. I stared at that letter for so long that my tea went cold, but I didn't even notice. My hands were shaking, but it wasn't from sadness. It was from rage. I had built that life. I had chosen that home. The house I had worked so hard for, from the long hours at the bank to the sacrifices I made for us. And now they thought they could just take it, as if it had always been theirs. I didn't need to hear any more from them. The audacity, the sheer gall of it, it was too much. That's when I picked up the phone and called Monica. She'd been a lawyer for almost 20 years, and I trusted her more than anyone. When I explained the situation, she went quiet. "Olivia," she said slowly, "do you still have your name on the deed?" "Yes," I replied. "He never changed it. Not once." "And he never bought you out of your share?" she asked. "No," I said, feeling the weight of it settle over me. "He didn't." I guess he figured I'd just fade away. She was quiet for a moment. Well, he made a mistake. What do you mean? I asked, confusion creeping into my voice. You're still legally entitled to half of that house, Olivia. You own half. And he never bought you out. The shock hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't realized. I hadn't thought about it that way. All these years I thought we were partners sharing everything. But Greg had never made it official. That house, the one he thought was just his, was mine too. You can file for a partition action, Monica continued. You can either force a sale or make them pay you for your share. I didn't know what to say at first. Felt like a dream. How could I possibly fight for something that had already been taken from me? Will they have to leave if they can't buy me out? Asked my voice low. Yes, she said. They will. He never thought this through, did he? I took a long breath, staring out the window at the garden I'd planted with my own hands. The roses were blooming like everything was still the same. But it wasn't. It would never be the same again. Let's do it, I said. I'm done being quiet. The phone rang 2 days later. It was Greg. He sounded different. Puffed up like he was trying to put on a mask of concern. But I could hear the nervousness in his voice. Olivia, did you really hire a lawyer? His words were slow, cautious, like he wasn't sure what kind of reaction he was about to get. Yes, I replied, my voice steady, no hint of hesitation. Why? He asked. What's the point of making this harder than it has to be? We've already decided this is what's best. I couldn't believe the audacity. He was trying to guilt-trip me, just like he always had. But this time I wasn't going to let him. The point is, I said, calm but firm, I'm not going to be treated like an afterthought. You want it out, Greg. Fine. But I'm not walking away quietly. Not this time. There was silence on the other end of the line. I could almost feel him squirming. You're making this harder than it has to be, he tried again. I mean, we can just move on and... Cut him off. Move on. I almost laughed. Maybe you should have thought about that before you moved her into my house. The line went dead. I didn't say another word. I had made my decision. There was no turning back now. But it didn't end there. No. The next day, I received an email from Clara. It was dripping with a level of condescension that I wasn't prepared for. You're embarrassing yourself, Olivia, the email read. This is a fresh start for Greg. It's been over for years, and you're holding on to a marriage that died a long time ago. You should let go. I read it over again and again, each word burning into my skin. She didn't have the decency to at least pretend to be civil. Well, she was making sure I knew exactly where I stood in all of this. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Monica. We needed to take the next step. I wasn't just sitting here anymore. I was fighting. And I was going to win. The papers were filed that afternoon. Clean, airtight, unshakable. My hands were steady as I signed them. This wasn't noise. This wasn't a temper tantrum. This was strategy. This was the calm before the storm. Greg didn't know what was coming. And neither did Clara. The court hearing was scheduled, but before that something happened. Something that lit a fire inside me. I drove by the house that was once mine. The place I had poured my heart into. And there it was, parked in my spot, as if it had always been hers. Clara's shiny white BMW. My heart stopped. I wasn't going to confront them. I wasn't there to start a scene. But as I pulled into the driveway, I had to breathe through the tension. The air felt thick with everything I couldn't say, everything I couldn't do. Yet, I wasn't knocking. Well, this time I was walking right in. But when I walked into my own house, everything had changed. The walls, the furniture, even the kitchen that I had designed. Nothing felt like home anymore. And that's when I realized. This wasn't just about the house. This was about my dignity. This was about showing them that I had more fight in me than they ever imagined. The door creaked as I turned the handle. I had to do a double take to make sure I was seeing things clearly. This was my house. the one I had dreamed of, built, and nurtured with my own hands. Yet the moment I stepped inside, everything felt foreign. Clara had turned my home into a stranger's house. The walls were painted in a pale beige that looked more like a hotel lobby than the warm, welcoming space we once shared. The family photos were gone, replaced by framed quotes. Good vibes only. Love wins. Felt like Pinterest threw up all over my memories. I stood in the living room, taking it all in, the emptiness settling over me like a thick fog. The couch I had chosen was still there, but everything around it screamed them, not us. The furniture was rearranged, the decor alien to everything I had ever imagined for this space. I was trying to keep my emotions in check, but I could feel something bubbling inside me. Not sadness, but something stronger. Anger. I was furious. And just as I was about to turn and walk back out, I heard footsteps. Clara appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing one of Greg's old t-shirts. It was too big for her, hanging loosely around her. She froze when she saw me standing there. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "I came to get my things," I said, holding up the email she had sent me. Her face turned crimson, and she stormed down the stairs. "You were supposed to schedule a time," she snapped. "We have rules now. Boundaries." I didn't flinch. I wasn't here to argue with her. I wasn't here to throw punches or scream. I walked past her slowly, my eyes cold. "Well, sweetheart, as long as my name's still on this house, I'll come and go as I please." Her face turned bright red. I could feel her pulse, her anger rising. "Greg will hear about this," she threatened. "Good," I said, my voice steady, not a hint of emotion in it. He should have been the one to greet me. I packed my things quietly. A few boxes, some books, a necklace from my mother. I didn't need much. I had already decided I would never live here again. Not because I couldn't, but because I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of thinking they'd pushed me out. Bridget followed me around like a shadow, arms crossed, eyes rolling. She couldn't resist throwing a jab. "Pathetic," she whispered under her breath. I stopped dead in my tracks. I turned to face her. "Excuse me." She straightened her back, as if preparing for some sort of confrontation. "You couldn't hold on to your husband, so now you're playing petty games. You're jealous because he wanted someone better." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. Better doesn't last. And I'm not playing games. I'm just claiming what's mine. Then I turned and walked out. The paperwork was officially filed. Greg had no idea what he had set in motion. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next day I heard from him again. This time he wasn't calling me to argue. He was calling because he was starting to panic. And I wasn't going to give him the peace he was looking for. The phone rang again. It was Greg. This time his voice sounded different. Softer, almost desperate. There was no anger, no bitterness. Just a man who was realizing the mess he had made. But I wasn't buying it. "Olivia, we need to talk," he said, his tone almost pleading. I leaned back in my chair, a faint smile creeping across my face. "Oh, now you want to talk?" "I don't think we need to talk," I replied coolly. "But go ahead." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. It wasn't the controlled, confident breathing of the man I used to know. No, this was the shaky breath of someone who was running out of options. "You're really going to force this?" he asked, almost as if he couldn't believe I was going through with it. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "I'm really going to force this." He let out a frustrated sigh, but I could feel his fear rising. "Olivia, we can't afford to buy you out right now. This is insane. You're making things so much harder than they need to be." I couldn't help but laugh. It wasn't a kind laugh. It wasn't out of amusement. It was the laugh of someone who had been pushed too far for too long. "You're the one who made it hard," I said, my voice calm but biting. "You moved her in before the ink was even dry on our divorce papers. You took everything from me, Greg. Now I'm taking back what's mine." I could hear the change in his voice. It wasn't defensive anymore. It was resigned. "Olivia, please. We didn't mean for it to happen like this, he said, almost like he was begging for forgiveness. This isn't what I wanted. You know I never wanted to hurt you. Then why did you? I asked, my words sharp. He didn't have an answer for that. Silence stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. I never thought you would fight like this, he finally said, his voice low. I thought you'd just let it go. You were always so patient, so quiet. I thought you'd disappear quietly. You underestimated me, I replied, the fire inside me burning brighter with each word. You thought I was weak. But now you're seeing exactly what happens when you push someone too far. He didn't respond. And honestly, I didn't care. I wasn't doing this for him. I was doing this for me. The line went dead. The next morning the court papers went through. The partition action was accepted. But Greg and Clara had no idea just how deep they were in now. They didn't know that what they thought was just a nuisance was about to become their worst nightmare. And it was only going to get worse from here. It wasn't long before the next phase of the battle began. I'd sent the papers. Made my move. And now, I was waiting for Greg and Clara to realize what they were up against. The phone calls started again. This time it wasn't just Greg. It was her too. Clara. Her voice, dripping with attitude, came through loud and clear. Olivia, this has gone far enough, she said, her tone sweet but condescending. Greg and I are trying to build a life together, and you're making it impossible. This doesn't need to be ugly. I took a deep breath, the calm before the storm. Oh, it's already ugly, Clara. You just didn't know it until now. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. She wasn't expecting me to fight back. But I wasn't about to back down. Not this time. I don't know why you're doing this, she continued. You have nothing left to prove. You don't need the house. Just a house. Let us live. Let us have something, Olivia. I almost laughed. Let us live. As if they hadn't taken everything already. It's not just a house, Clara. It's my life. And you've been living in it for far too long. But you'll see, I'm not going anywhere. She didn't respond right away. I could hear the silence on the other end. The tension building as she realized this wasn't the same Olivia she'd expected. She had underestimated me. But that's when I realized the truth. This wasn't just about property. It was about respect. And I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. The next morning I went to the court, papers in hand, ready to seal the deal. I wasn't just collecting my belongings anymore. I was collecting my dignity, my future, and making damn sure I had a seat at the table. The judge took one look at the documents, the deed, the mortgage, everything, and made it official. You remain a legal co-owner of the property, the judge said, his voice firm. Unless the parties involved can agree on a private buyout, this property must be sold. I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't about the house anymore. It was about the victory, the validation, the acknowledgement that I still had a stake in this. As the paperwork moved through, I could feel the pressure building on Greg and Clara. They had no idea what was coming next. They had no idea how much I had already planned, how much I was willing to fight for what was mine. The next few days were about to get a whole lot more complicated for them. The moment I received the news, I knew this was the turning point. The house, the one that had once been a symbol of us, was now officially on the market. The sale was court-ordered. They could try to fight it, but they couldn't outrun the truth. It wasn't just Greg's anymore. It was mine too. And now the clock was ticking. I drove by the house the next day. The for sale by owner sign was out front, a half-hearted attempt to bypass the agent fees. They were trying to rush the sale, desperate to cut ties and move on. But I could see it, the cracks were starting to show. They weren't prepared for what was coming. They weren't prepared for the weight of their choices to come crashing down. I didn't need to walk through the front door again. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. I was done with that place, with that life. But I couldn't help myself. The house was calling me. Not for the memories, not for the loss, but for the closure. When I walked past, I saw Greg's car parked out front. His usual black sedan. Clara's white BMW was in its spot, the one that used to be mine. They didn't think it through, did they? The small, petty victories they thought they'd claimed were about to turn into the biggest mistake of their lives. Took a breath. One more deep, cleansing breath. It was time to let the system do the talking for me. That evening Greg called. Again. This time there was no anger in his voice. No condescension. Just a man realizing that the world he had carefully crafted for himself was falling apart, piece by piece. "I can't believe you're doing this to us," he said. The hurt in his voice was almost convincing. "This isn't about you anymore, Olivia. This is between me and Clara now. Why are you making this so hard?" I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. The truth was simple. He was the one who had made it hard, not me. "You should have thought about that before you moved her into my house," I said calmly, my voice a quiet storm. There was silence on the other end. And then his voice cracked. "You're really going to make me sell the house, aren't you?" I didn't have to say anything more. I didn't have to scream or argue. He knew the answer. And so did I. As the days went by, I watched them struggle, trying to keep their lives together while the walls closed in around them. But the house wasn't their home anymore. It was a ticking clock. And they didn't have much time left. The final hammer was about to fall. The tension was thick in the air. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about power, control, respect. And I wasn't going to let them take any more from me. Greg and Clara were sinking fast, and I could almost taste their desperation. I wasn't the one in the wrong here. I wasn't the one who moved someone into a house that didn't belong to her. I wasn't the one who threw away everything we had built. They had underestimated me, and now they were starting to realize the consequences. I could hear Greg's voice crack over the phone when he called again, trying to make one last-ditch effort. "Olivia," he said, his tone almost pleading, "this isn't fair. We're not ready to move on. We can't afford the house, we can't even afford the buyout. Please, just let us have this one thing." One thing. He didn't get to call the shots anymore. He lost that privilege when he made the choices he did. "I didn't make you do anything, Greg," I said, my voice colder than ever. "You wanted out. You wanted her, and now you're getting what comes with that. This is what happens when you think you can walk away without consequences." There was a long pause. I could hear him struggling to find the right words, but the truth had already settled in. He had nothing left to bargain with. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. "You can let it go. Let it go." I repeated, disbelief lacing my voice. "No, I'm not letting anything go. This is mine, Greg. I've earned this. And now, it's time for you to pay for your choices." The line went silent again. It was the kind of silence that said everything. He knew I wasn't backing down. The next few days felt like a slow march toward the inevitable. Greg and Clara had hired a lawyer. They tried to challenge the partition, but it was pointless. The judge looked at the deed, the paperwork, and all he had to say was, "Miss Foster remains a legal co-owner. Unless the parties agree to a private buyout, the property must be sold." That was it. It was over. There was no way out for them. But even though the battle was practically won, the final step hadn't come yet. They still had the house, still had the keys. They still thought they had control. But I knew what was coming next. I knew how this story would end. I passed by the house one more time, and it wasn't just for closure anymore. It was for the sweet taste of victory. It wasn't just about the house. It was about reclaiming my life, my power. And they had no idea that the end was already here. It was over. They didn't know it yet, but everything had already shifted. The house, the possessions, the years we spent together. It all became a distant memory the moment the judge made his ruling. The property had to be sold. And neither Greg nor Clara could afford to buy me out. The countdown was on. I remember the day it all came to a head. The final walkthrough. The house, once a symbol of our life together, had become a battleground. Greg and Clara were scrambling. They tried to delay, tried to buy time, but the clock was ticking. There was no way out. Monica called me, her voice calm, almost triumphant. It's done. They've signed the papers. The sale is final. And just like that, it's over. I stood in my new apartment, looking out at the city lights, the weight of it all settling in. The house was gone, but so was the past. I wasn't chained to it anymore. The pain, the heartbreak, the betrayal, it had all served its purpose. Taught me my worth, my strength. The buyers moved in, a young couple, full of hope. They were expecting their first child, and they had already started turning my old garden into a vegetable patch. They told the agent they felt like they were home, finally. And I smiled, knowing that the house would be filled with love again, something I hadn't felt there in years. Greg called me one more time. I didn't pick up. Then he sent me a message, a text I could barely stomach. He wanted to know if I could help with a deposit for their new place. They were short. I laughed when I read it. Short. After everything they had put me through. After he had moved her into my house, my home. Well, I wasn't going to help them rebuild what they had destroyed. A week after the sale closed, I took a moment for myself. The silence in my apartment felt different now. It wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. The weight of the past had finally lifted. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something. I wasn't holding on to the past or the pain. I was free. And for once it was enough. But this wasn't the end of the story. No, this was just the beginning. I wasn't just rebuilding a life. I was claiming the life I deserved. And when I sat down at my new kitchen table, sipping my tea, I realized something powerful. I didn't need anyone's permission to live. I was whole just as I was. And as I moved forward, I understood that sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't what you think. It's not in the noise or the chaos or the fight. It's in the quiet, in the calm after the storm. It's in choosing peace over pain, strength over silence, and rebuilding your life without looking back. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.